Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our majlis, to Monday majlis to this evening. I nearly said tonight, and it's my greatest pleasure to introduce you, Nikola Pantic. Many of you, of course, know him, but many of you don't, and it will be a delight for you to discover his scholarship. I met him very recently at a conference in Dublin, organized by our dear colleague there, Zohar Hadromi Aldous. And I was very impressed by Nikola's scholarship and wanted to share it with you. Also, you may know that we have, so this is organized by the Center for the Study of Islam at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies in Exeter, but we have also a new center which is for magic. So and I thought that this Nikola's work is immensely interesting for that, and this would be also an introduction to people in that center. So yeah, welcome, Nikola, and we will do the usual thing. So Nikola will now usual thing, which is that our guests they present first themselves. So that was an idea I had before starting these talks this term, to bring this after dinner table discussion in ahead of the actual presentation. Nikola will keep it fairly short because he has a lot to say in the actual presentation, but we will still have something of his journey. He's from Belgrade, Serbia, and he's an Ottomanist and a magician. So that's always good to listen to. And I'm also trying to use these majlises to introduce people from various fields of scholarships, but also various countries and various stages of career. So to discover hidden and well-known gems in our fields. So Nikola, I put myself silent and it's yours.
Sure, Istvan, thank you very much first for inviting me, and also the pleasure is all mine as for the conference and as for everything there. That was a very fun couple of days, and I enjoyed it. We need to do that again. I need to disappoint though. I mean, the comment about the magician, it seems interesting, but I'm not here to do any tricks. And although this talk, I mean, it's going to deal in religion and magic, and although I presently run a research into the very procedure of the wonder-working rituals in the Middle East and among the Arabs, this is not what I'm going to talk about here tonight. I'm in fact going to present my theoretical approach to these methods, which is based on my PhD thesis research, which I did in Budapest and then in Berlin with trips to Lebanon and a little bit in Syria and Egypt, and then finalized in Vienna. And this is the theoretical approach which I'm using to study these issues and to approach the difference and the distinction between religion and magic among the Arabs in the Ottoman Empire in the early modern period. My research so far focused on 18th century Syria, but I've read on a large amount of sources which basically covered the early modern period in general and in the Ottoman Empire, of course. And I was trying to also bring a comparative perspective with other monotheist traditions, Christianities predominantly, some especially some issues pertaining to religion and magic, and the distinction between them are very comparable with Catholic Christianity in the West prior to its Reformation periods. And I was trying to include this. I was reading a lot of European secondary literature mostly, but a couple of primary sources as well, and trying to combine the theoretical approach which the scholars who used, which the scholars who researched the magic in Europe also used in their work, and try to test it and to see if I can bring it into Islam. And I've got some, I could say, pretty original findings. Although, as I said in the as I indicated in the title, this is a new old approach since it exists, but it comes out as a suggestion specified here for Islam of the early modern period. and specified for Ottoman Sunnism, because this is what I was what I was mainly focused at. But I think that it is applicable to other periods and of course other regions, so that it also can be quite confessional and implicit in about monotheist religions in general. Now, to build this approach, I was using we could call this traditional scholarship.
Nikola, sorry, I can follow you, but if you could be a tiny bit slower, that
Sure.
would maybe help. I don't have the same speed of mind as you do, so and we have lots of people who are not native speakers, so it may be a bit useful. If it's you are followable, but still, if you can go a bit slower, that could be easier.
All right, absolutely, and I'm sorry for this. I'll try to temper myself down. Yeah, so basically to structure this approach, I had to go into the old debates, which is still present in the scholarship about Islam, and the scholarship more specifically on Sufism, and people who deal in Sufism, as I do, directly will figure out, I mean, they will mostly be reminded of the fact that the old dichotomy of orthodoxies and heterodoxies in Sufism and in Islam is still a kind of an unresolved debate. Even though several different solutions have been presented over time, and many scholars were trying to bridge this particular problem and to find their way to fix it. I am not saying here that these solutions are in anyhow wrong or that they somehow do not have merit. I'm just saying that I'm offering my own idea as to how this can be done, because I expose the gap in the extant scholarship on Islam and on Sufism, and I'm trying to fill it with my own research. And for that, as I said, I'm engaging with traditional scholarship about Sufism, as well as in some modern, I mean, in many modern works on the Ottoman Empire and in Sufism in general. The problem with the traditional scholarship, which mostly defines Sufism as highly unorthodox and very eccentric and very esoteric and by no means connected to official Islam, I think that the main problem with it is that when it started with Bruce Spencer Trimingham and Gibbon Bowen and many other names, it seems like these scholars, although they were professionals in their own fields, they were trying to pronounce more upon the orthodoxy of the practices they were analyzing from a theological perspective than to read into its historical and socio-anthropological implications. And later on, after Trimingham and Gibbon Bowen, many scholars built in their method, and one must mention Ernest Gellner in his 1969 work on the pendulum swing theory in Islam, which situates the development of Sufism on the margins of Muslim states and in marginal societies. And this theory kind of comes more fleshed out in his Muslim Society from 1981, which defines Sufism as something that always happens at the margins of great empires or of Muslim states when the state power weakens. And the good question would be, why am I bringing up these theories now? Because they seem kind of...
Sorry if I may interrupt. Nikola, if you don't mind, again, please slow down a little bit. I'm sorry.
All right.
What you're talking about is very interesting, and I'm following you. And I suffer from the same problem as you do. I speak too quickly, but please slow down a little bit. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry, Samer. I'll try my best to moderate myself even more.
Thank you.
Rightio. So where was I? Yeah, one would ask the question as to why am I bringing these old theories and talking about them again? Why am I kicking this proverbial dead horse? But in my scholarly work on 18th century Syria, for instance, I have already encountered echoes of this theory still present in some of the most contemporary scholarship. For instance, the awarded book of James Rehan about the Sufism and popular religion in Ottoman Syria. It has this theory of the popular religion in Syria, for instance, representing what he calls an agrarian religion. So something which happens among the popular cultures of the rural environments, which are heavily relied upon by the much smaller urban environments in Syria and broader. And this popular culture, in his theory, overwhelms the official Islam of the traditional ulama, who are somehow separated as a clique, which is somehow disconnected and is in its own clique that just performs both its speeches and its writings as a sort of an intellectual exercise for themselves and amongst themselves. And it's a view that can be backed up by some primary sources, but it also kind of fails to lead us into into the practical implications of Sufism and to tell us about its importance both for state policies in the Ottoman times and before and after even, and to show us the full complexity of what Sufism was there for. Now, many other literature exists in the Ottoman Empire that resolves this issue, at least from some angles. And it is impossible not to mention that Terzioglu and Tijana Krstic in their works on the integration of Sufism into state policies of the Ottoman Empire. Similar is the case with Michael Winters and his Society and Religion in Early Modern Ottoman Egypt, which is basically a historical biographical work of Abdul Wahab al-Sha'rani's life and work, which shows how powerful and how political and public figures certain Sufi masters might have become. Rashida Sheikh and David D. Comments also have a great picture of a Sufi ulamaic overlap in Egypt and Syria, and this overlap, this crisscross role of the ulama stepping into Sufi lodges and practicing Sufism for the sake of attaining more popularity and more engagement, both social and political, is what I'm going to talk about today. So basically, I'm reading all of these sources and kind of making here a synthetic approach, which is trying to answer a very specific question, which is rarely tackled, although described by some traditional literature in terms of spectacular events and spectacular achievements, public displays of power, which the Sufis have performed in front of the people to amaze, to attract more followers, but they do not answer why. Why were these things done? And what function do they display in society? Why were they so significant? So the problem I'm trying to address tonight is this practical function of Sufism, which is often in scholarship standing at the boundary between orthodoxy and magic. My main point here is that Sufism represented the primary vessel for the trade of divine grace with the rest of the common people, which seems a comparable function to that of certain religious institutions in the West, for instance. Unlike in many other religions, the theological equivalent to a priestly class engaged in the bourdieusk religious fields, as the class that trades in thaumaturgical, which means wonders and miracles, wonder working, thaumaturgical goods, and offers to fulfill people's religious needs, which are both long-term, like salvation, for instance, or immediate, such as healing or assistance with love affairs, with attaining more money, etc., does not exist. I argue that this function was in Islam fulfilled by a specific group, which reflects a significant overlap between the institutional ulamaic and institutional Sufi teachings, where the latter represented a primary medium for Muslim thaumaturgy, technically and anthropologically comparable to the phenomenon of siḥr, or magic, yet distinguished clearly from it by the religious authorities in office at the time. The difference seems to be in the energy which fueled the Sufi thaumaturgical action and the energies which were claimed to fuel magic in the Middle East. So it is worthwhile to start this discussion first by discussing a little bit in short detail the ideas of divine grace as it was believed in the Ottoman Empire during the early modern period. The Arabic term for this is baraka. And the baraka in bourdieusk terms represented the magical or thaumaturgical capital, rather, which served as a fuel that imbued and empowered objects, places, or people. Muslim beliefs in baraka were comparable to pre-modern Christian beliefs in God's grace. And according to these, this mystical grace made prophetic miracles as well as saintly and priestly wonders possible. Those who demonstrated extreme piety, devoutness, and virtue in life were occasionally believed to have become recipients of grace and furthermore capable of harvesting this thaumaturgical capital from certain sacred places, such as saintly shrines. Most importantly, these special individuals would be capable of dispensing divine grace to the rest of the people, acquiring thus a specific social function. During the pre-modern periods, the majority of the ulama in office wrote that the ultimate source of baraka was, of course, divine will. However, beliefs that all baraka came from Allah may at times seem a second-order dogmatic and casuistic explanation. And as a primary anthropological fact, on the other hand, baraka may have sometimes been seen as the energy of a hallowed individual or an object directly, and this is sometimes confirmed later on in the 20th century when ethnographies became popular in the West and many people traveled to the Middle East with ethnographic goals in mind. For instance, popular clerics like Samuel Curtis and Louis Patton, they witnessed many cases in which people prayed near shrines, for instance, to make their prayers more efficacious. And they heard that the presence of baraka in such places was obviously inspiring this trend. However, they document that people fear God, yet they fear the saint as well because he is near. And this is not something surprising nor something which seems pretty much esoteric, as it is ubiquitous across religions, and cognitive sciences has these answers to give on what is the difference between venerating objects that seem more closer to the believer than those which are abstract and distant, like the God creator in monotheist religions are. But we don't have time to get into this in more detail, unfortunately, which is a fascinating topic. But it's just better to stick here with the history of the divine grace itself. So in Islam, baraka through divine providence passed down through prophets, of whom many feature in the Bible as well, such as Abraham and Moses, etc., and then passes downwards to the deceased and then the still living Muslim saints, as well as numerous Sufi masters. The sheikhs were believed capable of developing various thaumaturgical skills and knowledge, as well as to cause wonders through this grace. Baraka had near physical properties in the belief of the people. Right? Muslims believed that the grace could leak between individuals through touch. This grace gathered around entombed saints or within their memorials, and it also formed residues in places where powerful thaumaturgical acts allegedly happened, such as, for instance, the hill very close in north of early modern Damascus, where Moses struck rocks, for instance, and it's a very powerful thaumaturgical place in the belief of the people, even up to today. Muslim thaumaturgists or wonder workers were believed capable of fueling small objects with a certain portion of their baraka. They would thus create talismans aimed at a range of purposes, from prophylactic to demonological, which are, for instance, aimed at controlling or banishing malevolent preternatural entities. The early modern subjects had a gesture called tabarruk, which in translation is the solicitation of blessing. One would hold their hands out, palms facing upwards. They would motion as if they gathered water to symbolize the collection of God's power, and then bathe over the body to symbolize bathing in the energy of God. This gesture is very standard among some Muslims even today, and it is functionally very comparable to the Christian sign of the cross. It was very customary to perform it upon seeing a saint or when passing by the saintly shrine. It was further believed that grace was earned by merit, most often after long years of studying under established Sufi sheikhs, so in Sufi lodges. Those who acquired reputation for their baraka commanded significant respect among their peers, as well as other members of society, and many people who were believed recipients of Allah's grace pursued official appointments in important and lucrative positions within the Ottoman administration. Their powers of office commanded significant socio-political influence in different parts of the Ottoman Empire, and their grace further served as a powerful means of social mobility that occasionally facilitated an individual's advance from humble origins towards the highest echelons of the Ottoman imperial administration. This religious, socio-political, and socio-anthropological significance of baraka is a primary historical fact.
Nikola. It's amazing, and I can somehow follow you, but still, please try to slow down a bit the airplane. It's loaded with immensely interesting information, and I think it's at the limit of being followable. But please try to. The thing is that Nikola talks this way normally, not just in talks, but that's his normal speed to talk. So yeah, please have grace, have some baraka on us, and try to
transmit
yeah.
Now, but each one, honestly,
I apologize.
If I would talk a little bit slower, I feel that I will die, because this is, as you said, this is very normal.
I know you. Yes.
Yeah, I'll try better than that. Now, I got lost a little bit, but since I'm consuming a lot of time also by this, and there is a lot of material, I should probably switch topics a little bit. And I think that we've got the idea of what this thaumaturgical research represents. So I should probably discuss in more detail the institution which used it both as one of its main trademarks and the markers of its trade, right? And this is the Sufi ulama with state appointments in the Ottoman Empire, as I have already indicated at the very beginning of this talk. Now, my first question will be how this overlap was created over time, after which I'm going to go in a more interesting part of this talk tonight into the differentiation between their trades, between the Sufi ulama trade and proper magic, right? What they considered magic in the early modern period, after which I will conclude with some historiographical remarks about thaumaturgy as a historical phenomenon now in general. So as for the overlap itself between the Sufi and the ulamaic groups, many theories existed for a long time in scholarship in the Ottoman Empire. But it is worthwhile to mention here Hussein Yilmaz, who recently published a book about the Ottoman, what he calls the Ottoman mystical turn, according to which the Ottoman period witnessed an unprecedented level of entanglement between Sufi and ulamaic circles. Now, due to heavy reliance on the Sufi orders, they became invaluable for the empire's spread. However, I mean, one can see that the popularity of Sufism had much earlier roots, and that throughout the early medieval era, Sufis in the Middle East strove to bring their teachings in line with the mainstream Sunni doctrine. Obviously, I mean, this was very important for them to be able to stay on the top of events and to stay on the top of this religious pyramid. Otherwise, if proclaimed too esoteric, there's some sort of a purge would happen early on. Mysticism played a significant role both for ulamaic sodalities in state administration and individual scholars from the medieval period onwards. Sufi initiates who had ulamaic careers in mind were required to learn about the ulamaic scholarly methods, techniques, and disciplines, along with the requirements of their respective orders. The prominent Sufi sheikhs from approximately the 11th century onwards seemed to scholars to move seamlessly between the madrasa and the tariqa, demonstrated shared practice, or shared language, and shared symbols. Through the dissemination of texts as well as oral transmission, Sufism gradually became more aligned to the ulamaic teachings, and in a similar fashion, since the Abbasids and until the modern period, the ulama establishment served mystagogic, initiatory, and thaumaturgical functions in addition to their other responsibilities. It was very rare for scholarship in Islam to notice this particular phenomenon of these quasi-priestly functions of the ulama. And some rare scholars here are Albert Khurani and Aziz Al-Azmi, who in fact represent my own academic silsila, because I graduated under Aziz Al-Azmi last year from my PhD. So where did Sufis reign? This is an important question here. This formulation of the lodges, of the basic principle of the Sufi institution here leads to the answer of the question about the overlap. This institutionalization of the madrasa system first, which was started by the Seljuks and reached its peak during the 15th to the 16th centuries, is very much important for this particular point, because by the 1500s, most madrasa teachers and judges had pensions. They were divided into ranks and had grades under state auspices. Most scholars' names figured on state pay ledgers, and some scholars like Niall Green, for instance, they saw the utilization of the madrasa system by the Sufis as a very important step towards the hard institutionalization, quote unquote, of Sufi orders. But this process resulted in an emerging institution of the Sufi tariqa over the passage of time, or the Sufi path, right? Tariqa literally means path in Arabic. Since the 11th century, the gradual alignment of Sufi doctrines to official versions of Muslim orthodoxy occurred in parallel with the development of institutional Sufism, which was a transition from the individual master-disciple relationship model to the Sufi turuk with large followings. Very early on, there existed a tendency of grouping Sufi adherents into clearly defined communities with distinct boundaries and internal rules, while Sufi education over time became increasingly tied to a particular location between roughly the 11th and the 13th centuries. These locations, the Sufi lodges, became the localities in which the core madrasa education was replicated by the disciples under sheikh's supervision. The institutionalization of the location and method of teaching ran in parallel with the alignment of Sufi doctrines with Sunni orthodoxy as the centuries passed, allowing for a wider dissemination of texts as highly important media for the spread of Sufi orders. Now, during the Mamluk and Ottoman centuries, the names of scholars such as Al-Suhrawardi and Al-Gilani became eponyms to indicate a particular set of doctrines, practices, and methods tied to increasingly differentiating Sufi orders. Their adherents commenced with codifying the collective past into concrete, self-regulating methods of organization and practice, which were highly convenient for further reproduction. Adherents to a given order were expected to function as brotherhoods based upon the medieval futuwa principle. Its elaborations laden with confraternal expressions aim to describe a community of equals in faith, which is incidentally very comparable to the ideas of the brotherhoods in Christ in the West, and which were, there was plenty of documents about this in the European sources during the pre-modern times. However, in both cases, clear ranks between the order's disciples seem to have begun emerging as early as the 11th century. This is, of course, for Islam. In Christianity, this happened much earlier, with initiates at the bottom and the masters of the orders at the top. This development followed a transitional process from individual master-disciple relationship to the tariqa with specific teachings, practice, and a set of doctrines. The legitimacy and authenticity of a given order was symbolized by that order's silsila, and I think that we all know that the silsila represents a line of masters and disciples that ranges all the way until the eponymous founder of a particular Sufi order, and often further to all the way towards the prophets, often through Ali ibn Abi Talib. Silsilas were fundamental for internal organization of various Sufi paths, and as they represented core principles around which the turuk were organized. Rooted into the silsila principle, the turuq became efficient mechanisms of saint-making through the initiation of individuals, functioning at the same time as baraka conducting chains and isnads, leading to important historical Muslims to ensure each order's integrity. The order's masters were to be obeyed without questions, based upon the silsila principle. They commanded authority as the successors of a long line of Sufi sheikhs instead of functioning as individual teachers to isolated groups. The growingly bureaucratized turuq gradually became institutionalized channels for the dissemination of Sufism as the secret legacy of the Prophet. Now, roughly during the Ottoman 14th and the 15th centuries, it's time to cross into the Ottoman era proper, emerging Sufi orders grew in popularity first among the Ottoman subjects. While the Ottoman administration strove to consolidate its authority over official imperial religion and deal with its rivals, such as the emerging Safavid dynasty, many orders that aligned with Sunnism became much closer to the state top. And one can bring up the cases of the Khalwati and the Naqshbandiya orders, which are most exemplary of this particular merger. At the same time, efforts have been made to align potentially problematic doctrines to the legislative norms of the Ottoman government, and illustrative examples are provided by scholarly studies on the Bektashi order's history, which is kind of tricky because it constantly had some esoteric escalations, but at the same time, it was connected with the Janissaries proper. So it was kind of tricky how the Ottoman government tried to canvas out these problems so as to keep the order and keep the religion of its military satisfied as well. And there is a book by Ayfer Karakaya Stamp on the topic, which is really fascinating to read. Now, many orders, though, many scholars, like Eric Hollander, long ago criticized the apparent reluctance of contemporary scholarship to acknowledge the ruling class's systematical patronage of popular Sufi scholars and the turuq from the medieval period onwards. These orders were very important already for the Abbasids, and by the time of the Ottoman times, we see an unprecedented merger of the Sufi orders into the Ottoman Caliphate administration through the ulamaic ranks. While these mystical orders were conforming to the imperial expectations of the social and religious norms, they were becoming increasingly popular among the Ottoman elites. The Ottomans enforced Friday prayers and commissioned the erection of numerous madrasas, mosques, and masjids, allowing the Sufi ulama, now a more and more overlapping entity, to compete for appointments. By the 16th century, Sufis could hold important government posts such as tenures at courts, while adherents of various mystical orders were taking a growingly significant role in many political and jurisprudential matters. Ottoman sources from the late 15th century onwards show an unprecedented degree of turuq organization as institutional networks across the empire and under control of state administration. The centralization, we're looking at the centralization process here at the top of the timeline. The centralization of Sufi lodges network reflects the Ottoman rulers' effort to organize the empire's religion and its orthodoxy and structure the orders of religious professionals to conform with state policies and respond to pressures from both within and outside its borders. Ottoman imperial patronage strategies reveal a process of legitimization in which the state administration continuously distinguished orthodox from the illicit practices. This process extended over both the Sufi and the ulamaic sodalities in the early modern period. This increased bureaucratization of the state affected an unparalleled degree of centralization of Ottoman ulamaic groups and their official functions. Over time, the ulamaic networks became highly exclusive and privileged social groups. The overlap between the Sufis and the ulama intensified, while the appointment of the Sufi sheikhs, preachers, and teachers largely came under control of Istanbul directly. The masters of those orders that were most correspondent to the Ottoman political designs acquired immense renown, which attracted numerous scholars. Rashid al-Sheikh, for instance, and David Dean comments here, you need to mention them as well. In their works in Syria and Egypt, they recognize this overlap, although they do not comment much on it. And even though it still remains evident up to this day, when, for instance, in the institution of Al-Azhar, which during the early modern times and during the 19th century held 9 Khalwatiya Sufis as Al-Azhar sheikhs, it still has a member of the faculty who claims allegiance to the Khalwatiya today. The Sufis thus came to represent an obvious corporate entity with specific gathering centers, specific garments, as Niall Green says, and I quote, specific vows of allegiance and an arcane dialect, end quote. The Sufism that was taught represented an increasingly institutionalized, confessionalized, and domesticated doctrine. Officially appointed Sufi scholars enjoyed askari status, superior to the ordinary tax-paying subjects, and were immune to execution and confiscation. They accumulated finances along with landed properties through the Waqf institutions that secured the social and material status of families over the ensuing centuries. Careerism intensified among the appointed scholars, with an increase in documented attempts to manipulate occupational benefits for the prosperity of the appointees' families. And Ottoman scholarship, such as Madeleine Zilfi, long ago noticed that, for instance, the 18th century, the top of the early modern period before the Muslim reforms, represented a period of true arrogance in the power of the ulama, in part caused by the diminishing Qadizadali movement of religious rigorism. And here, unfortunately, I don't have time to go into religious rigorism of the period, but we can probably discuss some of it during the Q&A. Now, prior to the modern period, the function of the Sufi ulamaic networks was manifold, but the one I will highlight here today is their role as the institutional dispensers of divine grace. This is a paraphrased expression already used by Keith Thomas, who published this very, very hefty volume about religion in England during the early modern period. And he started looking into thaumaturgy on the boundaries between religion and magic in Catholicism during the early modern periods. However, I mean, the book, although it does not develop its own theory very well, it provides a great model here, which I'm trying to introduce into the following discussion. So as for the Sufi ulama, they had a function as intercessors between the people and the law, even though the intercessory function does not has a theological equivalent directly in the scripture. Yet they served as leader of prayers, or imams. They held sermons as khatibs. They preached as ru'as and performed other devotional functions. The Ottoman Sufi ulama performed also daily thaumaturgical interventions, such as curing injuries and sicknesses or banishing demons through exorcisms. They assisted the people in baraka harvesting from holy places or from hallowed individuals. And it was also widely believed that their baraka prevented misfortunes or natural disasters. These beliefs are comparable to many other regions of the world and many other religions of the world as well. I already brought Catholics in early modern Europe, but they're by no means the only example. I believe that the thaumaturgical beliefs and practices in early modern Ottoman Empire and the significance of baraka for the common people and the elites represented key elements to defining the Ottoman early modern groups of religious authorities proper. This element was comprised of the practices and beliefs which represented the mechanical aspect of pre-modern scriptural religions, which was impossible to separate from the devotional religion prior to the modern reforms in Islam. This is comparable to Christianity in its Protestantism, for instance, in its various kinds. Judaism has similar parallels and so on. Anthropologically and technically comparable to various magical practices, yet through a long line of theologians defined as the power to cause wonders through divine will directly, the mechanical aspect of Islam, or its thaumaturgy, wonder working, was as important as its devotional counterpart, and the two were inseparable in the domain of religious belief and practice. It was widely believed that Allah's grace represented the energy behind thaumaturgical acts, and the beliefs in baraka tied the Sufi and ulamaic confraternities into an institutionalized body of divine grace dispensers. In light of this pre-modern overlap, I consider that it is impossible to discuss the distinction between Sufism and official Islam before the advent of Muslim reformism. Institutional religious professionals in the Ottoman Empire seem to me best defined by the Sufi ulama, whose authority in religious matters was certified by the Ottoman administration. The beliefs in their baraka were endorsed by the state as well, for instance, through granting important appointments to the alleged wonder workers or through public demonstrations of belief in ulamaic grace. This group encouraged and advanced the engagement with the Sufi Turuk and venerating the living and dead Muslim saints. Ottoman religious professionals commanded a system for the conveyance of Allah's grace, most often in the form of pedigrees of individuals through the pedigrees of Sufi paths. The topography of the Ottoman Empire was laden with baraka, and it was believed that its network of religious professionals have only partially been immanentist or observable in the material world. According to the common belief, the network of Allah's baraka was comprised from preternatural or transcendental entities as well, such as the deceased saints, as well as the prophets and other mystical beings. So I propose that this combination of Sufi training and official state appointments of an alim during the Ottoman period represents the key to locating and defining functions of what might be sociologically, albeit not theologically or liturgically by no means, identified as a Muslim priesthood, without intentions here to make robust and blind comparisons with Christian priestly establishments. So he used the term priesthood purely sociologically to refer to a highly exclusive establishmentarian group of religious professionals who over time kept particular vocabulary, particular behavior, as well as special garments as symbols of their office. The members of this network were united by a common educational itinerary, a strong sense of corporate identity, prerogatives and privileges, and the monopoly over devotional and educational functions. In addition, The Sufi ulama traditionally kept an idea that they were the successors of prophets after the demise of the caliphate. The Sufi ulama were further in practice defined and self-defined through their de facto role as intercessors between Allah and the people, as well as between political authorities and their subjects. They institutionally dispensed grace and brought other transcendental goods to the people, in addition to its work on legislation, education, and social control. Now, after making this point about what I meant in the abstract with the term priesthood itself clear, and I hope that it came through clear. If not, we can discuss it further. I'd like to say something about this differentiation between religion and magic, as I see it in the sources of the early modern period, and from how the theologians of the time and the Sufi ulama in office of the time defined their own functions. The problem here, and the problem generally with the scholarly unease of differentiation between these two categories, is the fact, the primary social and historical fact, that these thaumaturgical practices were technically, anthropologically, and conceptually quite homologous to magical practices and beliefs in the Ottoman Empire, as was the case in many other regions and with many other religions. But the Sufi ulama sodalities themselves over time developed socio-political distinctions that created the boundary between themselves as the institutional thaumaturgy, wonder dispensing body, simply put, and the rest of the people. The exclusive claim of the Sufi ulama to divine grace was made stronger through such boundaries, as the common people were forbidden to study and practice the same rituals without official guidance. The relationship between magic, or siḥr, and wonder, or karama, in pre-modern Islam seems comparable to relationships between thaumaturgy and magic in other religious traditions. The evolutionary theories of religion, which see magic as a primitive form of religious behavior and which influenced later authors to locate magics at the margins of a religion, seem to be a problem for discussing these differences between thaumaturgy, religion, and magic today, to a certain extent. When one reads into the founding fathers of comparative religion, such as Emil Durkheim, for instance, one reads explanations that religion is an already advanced system of subcults and practices that represents a higher state of the evolution of faith. Durkheim held that magic remains outside of the boundaries of religion, and we see this theory as it echoes through the works, for instance, of Ernest Gellner and some other scholars all the way up until today. And it's similar even in Hussein Yilmaz, who I mentioned at the beginning of this, closer to the beginning of this talk, with his theories of the Ottoman mystical term, where Sufism grew from the margins of the growing Ottoman Empire and overwhelmed the Ottoman state proper. Now, for Marcel Mauss, for instance, or for at their time popular scholars such as James Fraser and Bronislaw Malinowski, magic was a little religion, kind of like a mockery of religious form proper, one concerned with immediate goals and ultimately representative of a primitive form of a higher religious understanding of abstract supernatural entities. And in 2017, we have an example in the book of Alexander Nish, also an award-receiving book about Sufism, which is called The New History of Islamic Mysticism, that defines Sufism as an Islam in the miniature, which contains similar elements to Islam proper, but is distinguished from it and quite separate. So I suggest here the necessity to include thaumaturgy as the third category that stood between the binaries of religion and magic, and which partially intersected with magical beliefs and practices, yet represented the constituent element of pre-modern religion. Therefore, it might be said that the Ottoman pre-modern Sunnism contains sanctioned theurgical as well as magical sometimes beliefs and practices that represented the given religion's thaumaturgical tradition. Despite the technical, anthropological, and conceptual parallels between thaumaturgy and magic, there existed an array of historical and socio-political and theological distinctions between the two developed by religious authorities in office. Through such distinctions, the sodality of religious professionals pertinent to a given religion established their role as dispensers of divine grace, outlawing other practitioners as illicit wizards and magicians. In the Ottoman Empire, Sufi practice was distinguished from magic through the doctrine of Muslim priestly sodalities. Later on, the advent of Muslim reformism brought the Sufi ulama thaumaturgical practices into question, and during the 19th and the 20th centuries, with varying degrees of success, many such practices became classified as superstitions and heresies. This view opens a very broad comparative field for looking at the Ottoman Empire and similar historical processes that occurred, for instance, in Europe with the advent of Protestantism. And in fact, some scholars deal exactly with such comparisons, such as Tiana Krstic or Islam Dai in Berlin, and Aziz Al-Azmek, who recently had a conference about similar topics. Before the modern reforms, of course, Sunni theologians established categorical distinctions between magic and thaumaturgy based on the type of energy which was believed to cause their efficacy. In the Ottoman Empire, religious professionals insisted that the preternatural phenomena, called in Arabic khawariq, were real, all real, whether evil or good, whether beneficial or malevolent, and divided into magic, wonder, and miracle working. Any mystical effect caused by the pious and the righteous may have been understood or interpreted as a wonder. The Arabic correspondent word is karama. It was widely considered the Sufis represented champions of devoutness, righteousness, and piety, and these qualities, which in Arabic are jointly expressed through the term salah, most often represented the primary condition for the beliefs in one's grace. Because of their receiving grace, the Sufis, like the saints, supposedly caused wonders as well, while the prophets above them in the hierarchy under Allah caused miracles, mu'jizat. These beliefs remained fairly unchanged since the medieval period. And unlike wonder working, 18th century Syrian theologians considered magic an evil inspiration from the devil, often referred to as shaitaniya in the sources, from shaitan, Satan, or simply the devil. Sihr corrupted the world and human character, and any preternatural phenomenon caused by an evil individual, a sinner, or an unbeliever had to be clearly magical. Now this making distinctions between wonder working and magic based on the type of energy that supposedly caused them also represents a very comparable, one can even say ubiquitous thing in many religions around the world. And it is striking, however, that the concept of thaumaturgy rarely explicitly features in scholarship of today, which is dealing in these topics. Regardless of that, influential authors, starting from Max Weber, for instance, drew a line between religion and magic according to the moral dispositions of the entities invoked by the rituals. The emergent good and evil dichotomy, which I outlined briefly just a couple of minutes ago, may be found in many scholarly works in comparative religions. And some prominent sociologists and anthropologists describe magic as antinomian and daimonic, or committed to worshiping ancient and illicit deities. For instance, elementary forms of religious life, once again, Emil Durkheim discovered that the people of many regions sanctioned magic that was believed to bring benefits to the people, while in contrast, magical practices tied to curses or causing harm to people in the environment was condemned as witchcraft. It appears that the good-evil dichotomy between religion and magic stands in a direct relationship with the dichotomy of licit and illicit, which directly leads into debates about the orthodox and the heterodox. So these are all kind of like binaries which are interconnected. Throughout the history of pre-modern religions, meanwhile, religious authorities in office and not scholars who define a given orthodox religious practice have their own definitions, which need to be historically interpreted for the sake of understanding this, the background of the origin of all these practices better. Muslim theologians' treatises during the Ottoman Empire, which were committed to monopolizing orthodoxies and condemned any divergences from the proceedings of an officially prescribed ritual as sorcery or devil worship. Similarly, any usage of religious symbols outside of the given norm was outlawed, along with the participation in any rituals that the religious authorities did not establish themselves. Ottoman religious authorities often implied that the untrained would not be able to recognize the difference between wonder working and magic. And this is reflected even in the medieval period, where there was a saying attributed to Ibn Arabi that those without the master have the devil as master. Common people were advised to adhere to the normative prescriptions given by the religious authorities in office while performing common religious rites. Divergences or intentional practice of mystical arts by the commoners was a sign of infidelity, commonly known as kufr in Arabic. What is interesting is that as early as, for instance, the time of Ibn Khaldun, his Prolegomenon offers an additional and a very illuminating statement. Ibn Khaldun indicates that a Muslim saint or a Sufi or a practiced Sufi, a trained one, may accidentally perform magic, accidentally. He can perform siḥr, or that some of the Sufi activities, such as talismanics, may overlap with the category of siḥr. Ibn Khaldun considers this, however, permissible due to the saintly and Sufi grace, as well as their devotion expressed through dhikr, which protected them from all harm and proved them sinless. Baraka seems to have served as a vessel through which Muslim pre-modern authors distinguished between orthodox and heterodox beliefs and practices over the passage of time. It therefore appears that with Ottoman theological sodalities, as was the case with other monotheist traditions as well, the boundaries between religion and magic mostly helped maintain the boundaries between an exclusive group of religious professionals and the rest of the common people. Any similarities between institutionally sanctioned rituals and those of freelance magicians were immediately discarded, as the former were believed to represent the result of divine grace, while the latter were described as diabolical. The comparison of historical developments in monotheistic religions therefore reveals the distinctions between religion and magic continually represented issues of control, while religious authorities strove to preserve their place as official divine grace dispensers. Historians also noted that various groups of religious professionals during disputes often exchanged accusations of sorcery, illusionism, or fraud. And thus, it seems to me that a very cynical formulation, which is attributed to Eliphas Levi, which is a pseudonym for 19th century self-proclaimed ceremonial mage, who in his critique of the Enlightenment scholars, once he says, "What I do is miracle, but what you do is magic," it actually has weight and much significance for this analysis of the histories of Eurasian religions in general, and here specifically for Ottoman Sunni Islam as well. Because it espouses a particular strategy of exclusion aimed to preserve the institutional character of a sodality of professionals with a claim over religious orthodoxy through the belief in divine grace. To conclude briefly, I hope not more than 2 minutes more, the official religious authorities' classification of thaumaturgical beliefs and practices in Ottoman Empire as a fully orthodox cultural and religious corpus implies that Sufism, a primary vehicle for Muslim thaumaturgy during the early modern period, cannot be considered an odd, heterodox body of beliefs and practices, as some recent scholarship still seems to suggest. The absence of thaumaturgy from scholarly debates may occasionally lead to confusion between the anthropological categories of religion and magic. Some scholarship suggests that distinctions between these concepts appeared only with the advent of the European Enlightenment, yet we see that we have seen that it appeared in theological texts much earlier, although it is a fact that prior to modernity, we find that the terms a prayer and a spell, for instance, were very comparable to each other, and sometimes they were used as synonyms, but this depended from a source and from the author, so it is a much wider debate. The omission of thaumaturgy from scholarly analysis might on the one hand represent the consequence of the historical fact that thaumaturgy and magic were congruent from an anthropological point of view, but on the other, the conflation of the categories of thaumaturgy and magic may be owed to the Protestant influence in Europe, as well as the engagement of Muslim modern reformists in the Middle East and North Africa. Through the influences of such groups, thaumaturgy came under accusations that it represented magic itself, despite the historical fact that these categories were distinguished through the doctrines of religious institutions. This collapse of the thaumaturgy magic distinction may partially account for the cause of the unease with which scholarly studies of Islam today position the categories of religion and magic, as well as Islam and Sufism. The appropriate positioning of these concepts seems somewhat elusive, perhaps due to the influences of modern scholarly writing about thaumaturgy globally, as well as the efforts of the Muslim reformists to remove Sufism from mainstream religion. In fact, to excise it almost completely and to marginalize it fully. The belief in Muslim saintly cults and Sufi wonders in Islam was attacked by the Muslim reformists throughout the modern period, bringing about comparable historical developments to those in Europe after the advent of Protestantism. And through a number of anachronisms, Sufism is still frequently described by contemporary scholars as illicit and heretical. All the while, it continues to pervade and exert a considerable influence on many socio-anthropological and socio-political fields studied by the scholarship committed to Islam. Thank you very much. I will stop here because I think that I'm just bordering the time limit, and I would be looking forward to hearing some questions and to answer them. I hope that the debate will be a fruitful one.
Thank you very much, Nikola. Actually, you could have go.
Istvan, can you turn the volume up?
You can go still on, Nikola, if you want to, because we would still have a half an hour for discussion. So if there is anything what you wanted to add, and or you reached a conclusion here.
That's okay. I mean, I basically wrapped up with what I had in mind. There would be some more details, but they're not immediately relevant. I will bring them up if there is a question about it from the assembled participants. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I will before I stop the recording and we start the discussion. I don't want to forget to advertise our next speaker and our next majlis, which will be by Letizia Osti, and I put it into the chat. Just the title. Beyond the chessboard. Adventures in Abbasid Literature and Historiography. So it will be Letitia's new book, and she will discuss this topic. So that will be also exciting. Yes. So I'll stop the recording now, and then we will. If you have questions, please could you please raise your hand or send a message in the chat.
There were some raised hands already on
Good. Okay.
online, but
Yes.
they kind of disappeared from my